à l'ouest, au sud, à l'est, à l'ouest, au sud, à l'est e a l'ouest, a l'est e a l'ouest.
E poi lei sa meglio di me, probabilmente ha studiato anche lei, così mi sembra, vero? In principio.
This service that you perform, sir, do you use your hands?
The service you perform, do you use your hands?
Absolutely.
That I make these drawings every day in the morning because, as you know, the mind from waking up is got all the subjective links.
He communicates in the most effective way through a sharp pencil and a beautiful block of paper. He's always drawing, 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 drawing. It's the way he thinks. It's the way he argues points. You can see the buildings take shape.
To challenge the idea of presentation 25 years ago when I was a student, which I did not think the current mode of presentation would allow me to explore space in the way I can. There's really before computing was available to all of us. And the other thing was the idea of the projection, which I think became another very important component, that the projection of the drawing becomes the way kind of start the idea of kind of deformation, distortion, through projections allows you to look at the building in very different ways. So every time you look at the project, you look at it completely differently, and that really became a design process.
And architecture doesn't necessarily mean that it's the final form of a built building. A drawing to me is a completed piece of architecture. A building is a completed piece of architecture. A photograph of a drawing or a photograph of a architecture is a piece of architecture.
I remember Dr. Eisenman coming to Berlin and seeing these two pieces of in this great hall. They were 50 foot high. And he says to me that they're not architecture because you can't get in them. And I looked at him and I said, you can't get in them. See? In other words, he was not in the position to get into them because he did not understand them. You can only get into something if you understand.
To make something happen, because that's like a miracle. It really so sensitively transmit your ideas into flat, two-dimensional paper, and those traces are all, it's like blood come out of your vein.
So just a few words of introduction to Stephen. Stephen Holl, we should say. And there is this thing in architecture where we use only the first names as if we are actually all one family or very close friends. And in some ways, architecture is a very, very close family. And there is something not like a secret society, but like a group of people that absolutely love something. And to be an architect is to love buildings and to like being with people who love buildings. So in that sense, it is Stephen, not Stephen Holl. But Stephen Holl is absolutely a wonderful architect, and I think it's obvious an architect in his prime. And to be in his prime means for an architect something different maybe than for other fields. I think for Stephen it means he now makes buildings that are almost exactly the way he was drawing at the very beginning, when nobody was letting him build and he was making a magazine. And if you look at some of the projects in that magazine, you will see them now in the streets of China, almost as they were drawn. So the passage from the drawing to the building through thought, which maybe Stephen will talk about a bit, can happen over a long arc of a career, but it is to me, absolutely no question. Stephen Holl is an architect absolutely in his prime. Everything he's touching right now is coming out so beautiful, and it's obvious in the space we are. But I think there are two terrible conditions for an architect to give a lecture. There are at least two. One is to give a lecture in your own school. It's a disaster, because somehow it would be like, for example, giving, if what I was saying to you before is true, a lecture to your family, right? Suddenly now your family is there and you have to explain what it is that you're doing. No matter how much they love you, in fact, precisely because they love you, it's almost impossible. And Stephen has been teaching and being loved in the school, I think, for something like 31 years. So this is something like that arc I was talking about before, from the drawing to the building. So almost when Stephen started to teach in the school, it was somebody drawing and publishing and thinking. Now it is somebody drawing, publishing, thinking, building. And the building part flows exactly out of that. So the arc of Stephen as a teacher is very similar to this great arc in his work. You could almost imagine that Stephen is becoming young, because there is also something about architecture that everything goes in reverse, that he's becoming younger by the minute. Anyway, that's the first terrible condition to ask somebody to speak, which is to speak in their own school, and then perhaps even worse, to speak in their own building. So, because you are, and if you're an architect, you believe that buildings, you believe that buildings talk, that they have ideas, that they talk. So no matter what Stephen says today, the building is also giving a lecture, and the interesting thing is whether the building and Stephen give the same lecture or not. And so again, difficult, but therefore unbelievably nice that Stephen is willing to run the risk of these two restrictions to talk to us. And just, I think, an absolute thrill to be in this particular project in one of the most strategic locations of one of the most famous islands in the world. And if you were, after being to this building, asked where would be the acupuncture point on this island, you might, after seeing this building, think that it's here, not at the other end, which is normally what people are pointing to. And anyway, if you were to think of Manhattan as some kind of ship, which is the front of the ship and which is the back? I think if you come to Stephen's building, you start to think this is the front of the ship, and that for years we have been living in the back. And it is great that it is an architect that pulls us to the front, which is where, of course, you see America. And as you know, New York is very close to America, and it's just right there. So this is an architect that also allows us to see our own country. Wonderful things. So, Stephen, thank you for the building, and thank you for everything.
You're going to change this. I just want to say Adam Gross and Red Mike are here from Spirit of Space, and this is their work. Drawing is Thought can be accessed at 32 BNY with other video polemics, one every 4 weeks, right? If you guys keep working hard. And it's a project, it's a group project, and I was happy that they could get busy and finish it, because I couldn't pull together the topic Drawing as Thought. So this lecture is Timelight, a lecture that I gave and twice already, and this is going to be altered tonight. But the lecture is dedicated to my late friend Liyue Woods. Louis Kahn wrote, "Architecture does not exist. What exists is the spirit of architecture." And I think in Kahn's words, that most, my feeling about what Liyue Woods stood for comes out in Kahn's words. His designs were kind of politically charged fields of a reality that he created. And Liyue worked in ways very mysterious, kind of, he had collaborators, but he led the charge. And I asked him to do a pamphlet architecture in 1980, and he made up this idea of a pamphlet entitled Einstein's Tomb. And from his words, "The tomb is a vessel journeying outward on a beam of light, following an immense and subtle arc through the stars. For eons it will inhabit the dominions of space, until in a distant time it must return to the world of its beginning. Thus a cycle, the epicycle of space and time, will close." We know Einstein's not buried in that tomb, so I imagined that that tomb was launched on October 30th by the 1,000-mile-long storm Sandy, and now Liyue himself travels on his own beam of light invention. And a little bit more on Liyue. By way of resistance, he had By the way, you can access his websites. Many of the things that he said are still quite accessible. There's a lot of information still. And there's one section called By Way of Resistance. Lebbeus says, "It seems to me if architects really want to resist, then neither the idea nor the rhetoric of resistance has a place in it. Rather, they must create an independent idea of both architecture and the world. One looks for principles, but we are better off if we control them, not the other way around. Principles can become the tyrants foreclosing on our ability to learn. When they do, they too must be resisted." So these are a few of his, right off of his website. Resist whatever seems inevitable. Resist people who seem invincible. Resist any idea that contains the word algorithm. Resist the impulse to draw blob shapes. Resist the desire to travel to Paris in the spring. Resist the desire to move to Los Angeles anytime. Resist the idea that architecture is a building. Resist the idea that architecture can save the world. Resist the hope that you'll get that big job. Resist getting jobs. Resist taking the path of least resistance. Resist the temptation to talk fast. Resist anyone who asks you to design only the visible part. And by the way, that's really happening a lot lately, so I'm going to read that one twice. Resist anyone who asks you to design only the visible part. Resist the idea that you need a client to make architecture. So in the spirit of Lebbeus, this talk then goes back to when I didn't have any clients, and Mark kind of referred to that. And I just made these projects up. I invented a client. This was a gymnasium in the South Bronx, not far from here, a bridge out of the destitution of the South Bronx. This is 1977, and I drew this in Prentice Holl on my brother's drawing board. He was doing a Master's of Fine Arts. The form of the building is a series of bridges over bridges. Small entrance bridges at each end of the main span served a view down the axis of Brook Street. We're not really far from that site. The bridge is in water rather than over water and acts as a structural pivot from which the turnbridge portion of the main span rotates, so ships can go through the channel. You see someone in a rowboat coming down the channel. And in the floor plan, we had to invent a new sport called long basketball in order to fit it into that long, skinny plan. Another without clients project I started in 1979. And I saw myself the last boxcar go over the High Line, and it was a boxcar full of frozen turkeys. I think that was appropriate. And I'm very happy today that I can walk to work. This, by the way, was an idea about how many different kinds of people can live in Manhattan. Like you have an SRO hotel, you have a luxury condominiums, you have a student housing, you have, let's say, 2-bedroom apartments. But right now it's all luxury condominiums, unfortunately. But the public space is there. And we made several models, many, many models in steel. Another clientless project was the Gedenkbibliothek, a competition in 1988. The original competition for the American Gedenkbibliothek, right after the airlift, was for German architects and was paid for by American funds. And this was the reverse. And there were 13 architects invited. My project won. It was about a browsing circuit, about the unknown meeting of the user and the book. The notion of really open stacks. This is one of the first open stacks libraries in Germany, built in 1950. So this extension was really opening the open stacks. But alas, after the competition was announced, the senator said, "I will not build this building," and he ran another round of the competition, and we didn't win that one. And it reminds me that, you know, architecture is a kind of war, and what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. You have to just keep going. This is another clientless project for the Palazzo del Cinema. And by the way, this lecture is called Timelight, so this is really about time. In cinema, you have this ability to take something that lasted 40 years and put it down into 4 minutes. Or you have the ability to take something that lasted 40 seconds and stretch it into an hour. So it's a kind of an accordion time. By the way, you approach this from Venice via Vaporetto to the lagoon below it. So there's this kind of, let's say, accordion time, which is cinematic time. The kind of light that drops through into the lagoon is a diaphanous time, and there's a kind of absolute time in a cubic pantheon. And these cinemas interlock, and by the way, all the sightlines work. We worked on this competition for a year, and I think, in a way, it was a breakthrough project for me. We never expected it to be built, and we didn't expect even the winner to be built, and in fact, the winner wasn't built. It was Rafael Maneo, but it was an important project for the ideas of time, and the ideas of cinema, and the ideas of architecture, and how, in a way, cinema is a more powerful media than architecture. And then recently, last year, we made this book together with Sanford Quinter about what I called the 7 times of architecture. And yet, afterwards, after the book was published, I realized I made a big mistake, because I had worked on the book for a year saying that there's diurnal time, there's seasonal time, there's linear and cyclical time, linear time. Like the Greeks had cyclical time, so they kept perfecting and perfecting and perfecting, and we're condemned to linear time, which means we have to keep making something new all the time, something new. It's like fashion. That's a kind of trap as well. Anyway, but what I left out was the immeasurable, and I realized that's the most important. And I thought about Le Corbusier, what he called ineffable space, or inexpressible space. And Lou Kahn also spoke about the immeasurable quality of architecture. So that book is flawed. If anybody buys it, I will personally inscribe the missing piece in. This is a project that also is about time and light, above the Arctic Circle. And it's also a project about the struggle of architecture this took 15 years from the first sketches to the realization. And it was for the writer Knut Hamsun, a famous surrealist writer in Norway. And I see it as a body of invisible forces, inspired by the 1890 novel Hunger. And this is his words. Despite my alienation for myself at that moment, and even though I was nothing but a battleground for invisible forces, I was aware of every detail of what was going around me. A big brown dog ran across the street towards the trees and the Tivoli. It had a small collar made of Mexican silver. Farther up the street, a window on the first story opened, and a girl with her sleeves rolled up leaned out and began polishing the panes on the outside. Nothing escaped my eyes. I was sharp, and my brain was very much alive. Everything poured in towards me. The women before me had 2 blue feathers in their hats. I was really excited about the project, but there was enormous resistance. There were some 300 newspaper articles over a period of 3 years, and the resistance came from many different aspects. One of them was about the farm, so we moved the building to another site. Was actually... It became kind of the joke of Hameroy. In the tavern, they built a model and served beer out of the model. And yeah, it went on for on and on and on. And I thought, okay, this was a school teacher sending her students out to draw vernacular buildings in the landscape, and they all came back with the new Thompson Center because it was in the newspapers, and that was in their minds. They couldn't see the landscape. The media is so powerful today, it's just going to blind you. But someone came from Navarick and said, this building must be built. It's important for Norwegian culture, et cetera, et cetera. And he says, I'm going to the parliament. And he went to the parliament, and he got the thing funded. And suddenly they said, we have to have this ready for the 140th anniversary of Knut Hamsun, which was only 14 months away. So they worked night and day in 3 8-hour shifts continuously for 14 months. And they finished it on the 4th of August, 2009. And it's a great site if you get a chance to go there. But it's also a building that really does capture the angle of the sun and how it changes in time. The windows are not aligned to the floors, so the floors slip and slide up through the building, intersecting the windows in strange places, and you get a real kind of amazing condition of light and time changing. And every year the sun goes down around September or December 17th and doesn't come up again until about January 30th. So they always send me that last piece of sun, and they just say goodbye, we'll see you at the end of January. It's amazing. And then in the summertime, it's midnight sun for 6 weeks, and sun never goes down. Another project about the sea and about light, and in a way the time of the ocean, that is that empty horizon, is the Biarritz City du Surf, a building about the ocean, but really about the space of the horizon. The whole building revolves around being under the sky and under the sea, and this is under the sky, and it tilts towards the ocean horizon. And then under the sea, there's nothing on the curved surface. It's just one big curve without a single light fixture or any imperfections, thanks to Hervé Descott and a great team of people that worked on the project. So you really feel that sense of the sea in this white concrete. And it's a great place to experience the sunset. This is the only surfing city in Europe, Biarritz. So that's a longer story. I won't tell it now. This is the Chapel of St Ignatius, also a building about light and about the idea of spiritual exercises of the Jesuits. And the building was really designed around their program. The exercise is a kind of complement. There's a speaker and then there's a receiver. So we had the idea of complementary colors. So wherever there's a yellow field, there's a blue lens. Wherever there's a green field, there's a red lens. And so everything is in complementary colors, like the spiritual exercises of the Jesuits. And this is a project also this is really without a client. This is a totally hopeful, wish we could do it project that we did south of Rome in a town called Cassino. And a monastery was bombed by the Allies in 1944. And it was going to be the museum of the city of Cassino. And they had no program, so we had to write the program. And I decided the building should be about light as if it was a score, like a dance score, like a Laban notation. And it would take me an hour to present this building. But Jeff Kipnis said it was one of my most important projects. And this is a long time ago. This is 1990, I think. And it forms a public space. And then the way we discovered how the light would come in, and these are, kind of crude sections, but we built models of every piece. So each condition of light was studied in model form, and all these kind of strange occurrences have to do with the angle of the sun, and you can't model this in a computer because light falls off the surface of something by the square root of the distance from the source. So there's no ray tracing program that can do this. You have to build models to check this light and to see these phenomena, and also to check them in the time of the day and how the sun moves. But there are a series of simple spaces with some amazing conditions, and we thought, they could close this off and darken it if they needed to, but each room then just had this condition of how the light could change it, just one slice of light. And then we realized last year a building which is about music and time and light. And this is a building that you can see on a couple of videos, built around the analogy of Symphony of Modules, a piece of music written in 1967 by a Hungarian composer, István Holt, and never played. It was never played. And it had too many people in the orchestra. It was too complicated to play. It became our analog for the light being coming in to the frames of the building in 3 parts. It's a gallery and house, so there's a 10,000 square foot combination, mostly gallery, and there's a sheet of water that unites everything, and the 3 pavilions push up. So one's an entrance pavilion, one is the main house, and one is a guest house, but the gallery connects everything below. I think we did 30 schemes for this project, And once we had the concept of the Symphony of Modules, it came together in a week. It was a great client. Really appreciated architecture, and they kept giving us presents for doing our work. Like they gave us a plaque. They made these, every time I came over, they were giving us another present. I mean, and they did everything we wanted. I mean, it's a kind of, I wanted to do this in sort of this, it's copper, but it's stained in a special way to turn this leathery red. And I couldn't get it done in Korea. So I said, it has to be done in Kansas City. That's the only way we can get the color. And they did it. So the whole facade system was built by Zahner Metals in Kansas City and shipped to Korea. And so everything isn't made in Asia. Some things are made in America and go back to Asia. And the building is really an experiential thing. Here you are, you've just come into the entrance, and you come up into the entrance pavilion, and you think you're inside, but you realize that when you're here, you're really looking at the outside. Not really, because this is the inside of another outside. So you're inside looking at it outside, but that outside is really the inside of another outside. So the condition begins to be more like music. And it's really, I mean, that's why we did videos. Spirit of Space did these videos. You can get them on Vimeo, because it's really hard to take pictures of an experience. It's like taking pictures of music. It doesn't, it's a sequence of experiences. And they let us do the furniture and the rugs and light fixtures. And there's a sort of feeling of how that light changes. Wonderfully built by Korean craftsmen, all local material, Korean granite, bamboo formed concrete. They wanted a signature at the entrance, and I said, well, what about a kind of plan, a signature that sort of tells the story of the sheet of water that unites everything has to be recycled, so it goes down into a fountain and comes back up to the sheet again and continually recycles. And just briefly, this is a new project in Maggie's. It's a Maggie's Cancer Care Center in London, right in the center of London. A very historic site, very ancient site. St. Bart's Cathedral is there. St. Bart's Hospital, the first major hospital in the United Kingdom, is there, and the ancient St. Bart's Cathedral is there. And so I wanted to connect to music with this because I think music is a kind of healing. In fact, on the New York Times just 3 days ago, there was a whole article about how music has a healing capacity. So these people are cancer victims, and so I connected to shape notes, which is the Gregorian chant notation before 5-line staff. And I took the colors and tried to insert them. And the building really is a thing within a thing within a thing. There's a bamboo kind of interior, there's a concrete structural frame, and that's all wrapped in a Ocalux skin that has these shape notes floating in it. And then, you know, you can see the kind of condition of the staff lines. It's a very modest building in a way, but I think it's going to be a powerful one because of the details. The details, we have developed something new, absolutely new. Ocalux is a kind of like polar bear hair. It's hollow, and the glass is very thick. And you can insert, in between the outer membranes, you can actually insert a sheet of color. But that color dissolves like a Mark Rothko painting. So that's, and it's a new material that we're developing with Ocalux for this project. So, and that's just in the works now, so that should be coming up soon. And now, I was going to do the whole lecture just on this building, but I didn't have time, and I'm kind of glad I didn't because I realized there's just too much material. We were asked to do this building and have a design ready for October homecoming. Mark, do you remember that? Come on, it was like August, and they want a design to show everybody on October homecoming. That was scary. So I immediately tried to have an idea. Well, I mean, the first designs actually, well, first of all, it's like Mark said, it's a very important site. You know, Broadway is the first street in all of Manhattan. This was an Indian trail, and here we are. This is the most important street in Manhattan, the oldest street in Manhattan that connects all of Manhattan, and there we are. And also, you know, when it crosses, that's the first bridge into Manhattan. That was King's Bridge, built in 1693, the first bridge into Manhattan. So the site, you know, and there's Broadway Bridge. That's the site of the first bridge into Manhattan. Now it's Broadway Bridge. So the site is very charged. And one of the first things, I kept looking at the Broadway Bridge. You know, this is a lift bridge, I think, of unprecedented strength because it has to lift the subway trains and the automobile lanes. So it's an enormous power to lift all these things up so a boat can go through there. But then you get this whole structure, this strange gray structure. Okay, when an architect gets a commission and they say, well, let's just do whatever, so immediately I want to redesign the whole area, you know, like everything, engulf the building next door and go up the street and change this, and that ended pretty fast. They said there was a budget, which was very low. And thanks to Olaf and Chris McVoy, my partner, they somehow made the budget work. So now you see, this is what we showed in October. We said it's like a football play, points on the ground and lines in space. By the way, I played pulling guard on the West High Wildcats in my high school, and I was calling defensive signals and playing offense. I was one of the only players that played both offense and defense. And so those stories helped me get through the first part of the commission because I could talk to the football people, football language. And yeah, I think we showed them some of these drawings. Field house, velocity, time, energy, circulation. And then, so now we have to try to translate this concept into the form of a building. So then I'm making, you know, sort of points on the lines in space, points on the ground. And then I had the idea that athletes run over, they run under, and they run through. And then we made a series of models because we said that the running under is very important. So what it looks like from below might be more important than what it looks like from above. And then, so we started just looking underneath the building. And then we started to connect it to the other field house. That didn't work. It's too big, too, by the way. Here it's over budget, totally over budget. And then it was brown. It was Corten steel. And Michael Bell came up and said, ugh, it's so heavy. Can't you make it something lighter color? And I immediately made it into aluminum. Oh, and then there was a moment where I said, it's got to be linear, points on the ground and lines in space. And then it got really ugly for a couple of weeks. Enormously ugly, you know. But I was just saying, let's stick with it. Maybe we're going to get something new out of this. Thank God we realized to lay off. And then there was a meeting with Mark, and we started to talk about what's inside this building. And we said, there's three main parts. There's the body, that's the big gymnasium. There's the mind body, that's this room where, by the way, the seats you're sitting in are very wide because you're supposed to be sitting with football gear on. Hip pads, shoulder pads. That's why those seats are so wide. And by the way, we didn't design them because there's no budget for us to design those seats. So, you know, I mean, it's not like, and you don't want to argue with a bunch of football players either. But it is, it's the mind, this athlete scholar, the body, and the mind body. So that became more the diagram without points and lines and the blah, blah, blah. That became the diagram that we could communicate with the client and everybody around, except my other idea was still hovering under there. So it's an interesting problem because, you know, I always say that you need to have a concept that drives the design, but in this case, so many other factors are working on it that it starts to become something, a third thing. And so as it progressed, and many forces, and it's an enormously difficult client. I hope they're not in the room. They leave this to us, but we got through it. Lee Bollinger was nowhere to be found. Wonderful man, you know, invites you to do something, says, would you be willing to? But then, You never see him again. Only at the opening. Oh, great job, Stephen. Yeah, but what about all that hell we went through for 4 years? And there were models of the inside, and models of the outside, and models of the details, and details that had to be in the steel drawings. This is, you go outside, I think you can see this light. That had to come in the structural drawings because I want this piece to come in the light to hang out there. So, yeah, and then we had the groundbreaking. We weren't finished with the drawings, but we had the groundbreaking. And there's Lee. He shows up. Oh, nice, good idea. I'm like nervous as hell. I have the tie on. I'm the only guy with the tie on because I'm nervous. It's over budget. You know, they don't have the money yet, but we're breaking ground anyway. Ay. And it has to be open in September, and I don't see how they're going to ever get it ready. But because it was all prefabricated, and Olaf was a genius, the steel pieces were already in production when we were breaking ground, right, Olaf? And the planks were in production. So it was like an erector set because the foundation was already in. By the way, we broke ground and the foundation was in already. So it went together very fast. I mean, I went to China and I came back and they said, let's go up to the site. And I said, what? Where did all that come from so fast? It was all there. And then they topped it out very quickly, by the way. Amazing. Build everything out of precast things, in Manhattan especially, because it's built in New Jersey. It's much cheaper. And all these steel beams were built in New Jersey. There's a steel beam in the gymnasium that weighs 38 tons. Is that right? It's so heavy, they had to have 2 cranes to put it in place. That's because I didn't want any columns in the gymnasium. And then we want to expose all these, because these are beautiful. These are all structural joints. And these are bolts, but they look like rivets, so they had that feeling of the Broadway Bridge back in the days of riveting construction. And so we cut holes in certain walls to let us see those joints. And then the underside is really important. So you have to see it in the sunlight, in the reflection. And that, by the way, is New England ceiling blue. If you know anything about New England houses, all the porches have that baby blue, sky blue paint. It's not Columbia University blue, it's New England. Don't tell anybody. They think it's Columbia blue. It can be whatever you want. It can be Columbia blue, or I want it New England blue, and you know, it can be, it's like whatever you want it to mean. And then the stairs have another linear pattern, which we developed to catch the light in a special way, and that's why you have to come up here in the sunshine. Oh, and then the rail, the train goes by, so when you're in the gym, it practically feels like it's going to come into the gym with you, and that's a pretty interesting experience. But this detail, it's all digitally cut and was hand-drawn first, and the idea really works wonderfully, and that is that it picks up, and that's not even a good view of it, but it picks up the sun because the sun hits the thickness of these lines in different ways depending on which angle the sun is going, and then it throws very interesting shadows. And I don't really have a good slide of that phenomena, but that's really a wonderful phenomena of lines of light. And then Janine inserted something. We just did, just this second, about 2 minutes ago. So this is a football diagram called pre-snap identifiers. And you can see the U-boo, and you see the points on the ground and the lines in space. That's the pulling guard. I used to play pulling guard. And here's the building. It just fits right in there. There's the auditorium, and these are the points on the ground. And then the legs could move, maybe. People go up and down, and onto the roof, and then down the stairs, and onto the field. You gotta sign it. That drawing, that original drawing is in the room next to you if you want to. And then I just want to end with the slice porosity block going back to Liyue Woods. Very, very important project for us, 3 million square feet in this amazing town of Chengdu. And right from the beginning, we didn't want to make an object, we wanted to make a space. And also Chengdu is the oldest city in China with the same name for over 2,000 years. You see this map, a very old map, and none of these cities are in the same place. Chengdu has always been Chengdu. So there's another kind of history. And the building is an exoskeletal concrete frame sliced by the sun. And the idea of an integral urban form, making this urban space, making a public space with the building, the notion of micro-urbanism, the shops that are in the shopping center below that also open out onto the street and give life to the street, and then these micro-urbanistic buildings within buildings, buildings within buildings. That was the first sketch of building within building with three. I wanted three. So then we said, what will they be? That's the sunlight slicing. This is the 2 hours of required sunlight in China, slicing, and that gives us 2 hours that we need here. That gives the building its form. These are the actual diagram of the required sunlight. So we just followed it. We just said, okay, the structural concrete frame, that's the load-bearing frame. These are earthquake forces. And then where it's sliced, we turn it into glass. And then there was the idea for the main garden, comes from a poet who lived there in the year 713. This fugitive between the earth and the sky, from the northeast storm-tossed to the southwest, time has left stranded in 3 valleys. So that gave us 3 valleys, and each one of these has a different idea of time. And I won't talk about this, but it's very important. Another professor should give you a class on energy. I think today more important than many other things that we do as architects. On every project we made in China is almost like LEED's platinum. This is all geothermally heated and cooled, has every possible system that would take another hour to speak about. And there's the public space, and there's Liyue Woods' piece, and there's our piece, and Ai Weiwei's piece. They never realized Ai Weiwei's piece for political reasons. So there was the proposal, and there's Ai Weiwei, there's Liyue, there's our piece, and then the building was realized very, in a way, for such a big construction quite rapidly, and that's the structural frame that you're looking at. There's where the history pavilion goes. So when you see the building on the horizon in the city, you see that it's a space and not an object, because it's forming this public space. And this is a piece of a much longer film by Spirit of Space. That's all structural concrete, very thick, with a penetrating white stain. There were 150,000 people came to the opening of the project in November. And there's quite a few good cafes and restaurants around the edges of these ponds. The sort of Fifth Avenue of Chengdu. Fountain of 366 days. So each one of the fountains has to do with time. This is the Du Fu quote in cast iron. History Pavilion. The provincial history of Chengdu is projected on the bamboo walls. And there you can see the Light Pavilion. So this project for Liyue was really important. It ends up being the last building that he built. And you see exactly, and there's a wonderful book by Christoph Kompisch, The Light Pavilion, which has just been published by Lars Müller, that goes into more detail. But you can see right from the first sketches, this notion of vectors, the notion of forces, and the notion of, let's say, occupying this carved out space. It's about 4 stories tall. It's engulfing several levels and connecting with different levels of the building. And over a period of about 2 years, Lebbeus and Christoph worked on the development, how the walkways, how you would occupy, exactly how be suspended inside. And then the client tried to push it out of the project because of the budget. So we had a genius moment where I said, hey, wait a minute, that's the light fixture that lights the whole public space. You can't push that out of the project. And that somehow saved that part. And Ai Weiwei, we couldn't argue Ai Weiwei, so they didn't build Ai Weiwei's, but there's just a big hole there where Ai Weiwei's is supposed to be. So then this became sort of more instrumental, as it's going to give light to the space, and it really does light the whole space. It's amazing. And then more models were built, and then the construction, enormous pieces of steel occupying the inside of the lenses. And I went to Chengdu to be sure everything was going correct. So inside of those wonderful, delicate lines of Liyue Woods is this enormous steel section carrying the load, because they're going out from the building, cantilevering, and going way out from the facade. You see the walkways there, standing here. You can stand there and walk down those stairs and stand there. And the entire envelope is lined in polished stainless steel. There you can see it's coming out from the facade a couple, 3 meters. And you walk out from the facade, so you really feel you're outside. That's a construction drawing, because the walkway is not in. And here's, yeah. Standing here in the light pavilion of Liyue Woods in Chengdu, in our sliced porosity block, is an amazing experience. Lebbeus has realized a work that is actually everything he ever drew. Anti-gravitational. The feeling of up is down, the feeling of down is up. It's an amazing piece cut into the side of this building, which when you occupy it, you really understand the work and the sort of feeling, the vision of Lebbeus's work. And I'm really enormously excited that this piece of architecture got realized. So when I was there in November, I realized they had named this building Shiguang, which means time light, or in a way, the Chinese people here will know what that means. It means something like time light transcendent. So they gave it their own name. This is what happens in China. I love it. You see, CCTV is called Dakucha, big pants. I think he went to, he's probably angry about that. But for us, time light, Shiguang, that's wonderful. I'm very happy about that. And then I thought, just to summarize, this is one complicated idea, but I have this idea that this building, this piece of architecture is way more important, than its size. And here's why. I always loved Sigurd Gideon's book, Space, Time, and Architecture. It's from 1941, and I have a 1941, this is my 1941 edition of Space, Time, and Architecture. Gideon wrote the 4-dimensional space-time creation of architecture, not merely for the eye, but for the entire organism, the experiencing soul. It was like a breakthrough. It was like the extension of space and time merging and fusing. But what happened? What happened was, complexity and contradiction, everything went backwards. And then we have, 1963, we have the seminal text, Colin Rowe and Robert Slutsky, Transparency, Literal and Phenomenal. It returned the viewer to the static position, the frontal plane, the postmodern period. It returned us to 3 dimensions, took us out of 4 dimensions, returned us to 3 dimensions. But that's not what the physical world is doing. It's actually moving in the other direction. So what I think is important about Lebbeus's Pavilion is that it's as if, okay, I know he worked in 4 dimensions, always, X, Y, Z, and time. But because he dissolves the axis vertically and horizontally, it seems to me that there's some kind of 5th dimension to this project. And in a way, it begins with the XYZ, and then there's time, but this dissolution of the XYZ because of the way that everything dissolves in all directions, yeah, that's something important, and you have to go in it to see it. And it does light the whole space. And I'll just end with the first quote, but longer. There is no such thing as architecture. What does exist is the spirit of architecture, but it has no presence. What does have presence is a work of architecture. And at best, it must be considered as an offering of architecture itself merely because of the wonder of its beginning. Thank you.